that up a little bit. Hello, everybody. Welcome. We're going to be having a conversation with Deepa, who will be joining us here on Instagram Live. I'd love to hear, in a word, how you are feeling today. Please put it in the comments below. My name is Nicole. I am the founder of this little space. So it's so nice to see all of you. So in a word, how are you feeling? Put it into the comments below. Pretty soon we're going to be talking about our roles, how we can show up in social change, how we can make a difference, how we can make an impact, and how we can identify aligning our skills, our strengths, our passions, our responsibilities into this work in a meaningful way. I'm hearing people say hopeful, excited, heavy, a lot, not that great to be honest, exhausted. I think a lot of us are holding a ton of different emotions and experiencing different sensations with everything going on today. Committed, energetic, excited, lost. Deepa, when you are on here, just send me a note or send me an invite to come on live and I'll bring you on. So that's what we'll be talking about today. As I see all these beautiful people coming on here, how can we be really committed to our role? As we hold the space, tell me what questions you have about your work. Are you working? Are you a community organizer? Are you a community organizer? Are you an educator? I'm excited about tomorrow. I'm pushing to decenter whiteness in my educational spaces. Yeah, so how are you showing up? How have you defined your role so far in this work? One thing that I feel like people don't realize or understand is that everybody has a role to play in this work. Everybody has a responsibility to play in terms of sharing information, of advocating for other people to get work done. And so we think that's really important to hold space for and to have conversations about. And if you are listening and you're nervous or concerned about tomorrow, hopefully we'll have conversations on what we can do there. Hello. Oh, it's cut off my head. How are you?
Hi, how are you, Nicole?
I'm good. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here with you. Thanks for doing this.
Of course. So would you mind just introducing yourself to everybody on here?
Hi, everyone. So I'm Deepa Iyer, and I am with the Building Movement Project, which is a national nonprofit organization. And we strengthen social change advocates, activists, and organizations through research and resources, tools, and training. So I'm excited to be here with you all. It looks like we got a great turnout, which is wonderful.
It's wonderful. And I have been really excited because I featured your work in one of the news last week or 2 weeks ago. And it got such an incredible response. And I think, one, because your work and the work that your organization does is incredible. And also because I feel like a lot of people this year are really trying to understand how they can show up, right?
Yeah.
How they can best take action and how they can make change in the world. I'd love to hear, how did you get into this? How did you arrive to where you are now?
Wow, how much time do we have? No.
I know, right?
Well, so I will say that, my foray into the nonprofit sector and into racial justice work is very much informed by my own experiences as an immigrant. I moved to the state of Kentucky when I was 12 years old from Kerala, India. And I think your audio was cutting out a bit, Nicole, earlier.
Okay. I'll figure that out. I don't know what's going on. But you keep going. I can hear you fine.
Great. So it was really informed by my own experiences of growing up as an immigrant, really not clear where I fit within the Black or white binary, knowing very clearly I was not white. My work really has been primarily my political home, my community home has been in the Asian American community and the South Asian community, particularly post 9/11. And so given that we're coming up on the 20-year anniversary this year of 9/11, I've been thinking a lot about my own work in the years after the attacks of 9/11. So my community home is the South Asian community. And my work has primarily been in the nonprofit and movement sector, and very much informed by my own experiences and my family's experiences.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing and naming it. Nicole, can you talks and vice versa? I will try to do that as we go through this. But next question for you: how did you come to creating this kind of social ecosystem map? What's the importance of it, and what's like one thing you'd want to know?
Yeah, so the social change ecosystem framework really came out of my own experiences in doing work on racial justice and immigrant justice issues. I found that, whenever, and a lot of people on here, probably have this experience, and you might too, that when I went out to talk to communities about issues, like whether it was the census or whether it was around issues related to civil rights, the one question that people would always ask is, well, what do I do? Like, how do I take action? What if I don't, necessarily work at a nonprofit or in a movement space, or maybe I do, but I'm not working on those issues. What can I as a single person do? And there would also be, certain statements like, this is too overwhelming, to think about impacting climate change or impacting policies around voting rights. These are too big for me, and I'd rather let other people deal with it. So really the ecosystem framework is a response to that. It's a tool that individuals, organizations, networks can use to identify how they can align their values and their skills with the communities that they're part of in order to create change, so that it becomes something that we think about as a daily exercise that we do, rather than something that we do only when there's a crisis moment. And there are plenty of those, right? But how does it get beyond being a crisis moment? Because as you've talked about so much, we end up burning out if we're just responding to it from a crisis standpoint.
Yeah. And what I liked about your work too is like you need that consistent commitment, because some people think they can show up, do one thing, walk away. And so I love how your framework really encourages people to embody a role over time. One question that came up that people had was, is it okay to have multiple roles? Feel called to take on multiple responsibilities?
Absolutely. And, there's no sort of mandate on how you work with the ecosystem framework. It's out there for people to interpret. But I get that question asked often. And my response is yes, absolutely. We're all playing multiple roles. We are living in a society that requires us to do that, right? But I would say if you're playing all the roles, or 8 out of 10, you might be on the cusp of burning out. So you might not want to do that. But certainly, I'd be curious to know, Nicole, what roles you end up playing and what roles others do too.
Oof, that's such a good question. I've always found myself as a role of of offering information, of educating as much as possible. So that's one that, with this newsletter, I really try to do is I really believe that having information puts us information right in order and gets organized to respond. And so that's one of them that I'm taking. But in my other work outside of this, I really see myself as a healer, connecting people to that too. So I find myself kind of rolling between roles like that.
Yeah, and that's the case for, I think, many folks. And if folks have questions, about the roles, let me know. But there are 10 that I found myself observing in different movement spaces and in different organizational spaces that people either, like you said, rotate in and out of depending on the issue. And I think that one of the things that I heard a lot about why the framework resonated last summer when we had the uprisings around the country in response to anti-Black racism is that a lot of folks wanted to be frontline responders or wanted to be disruptors, right? Which traditionally we see as publicly visible roles, like the folks behind the bullhorn, the folks who are out on the streets. But not all of us could do that because of the pandemic, right?
Right.
And so, folks really, I think, resonated with understanding that they could actually be perhaps a storyteller to share stories of how their communities were responding, or they could actually be builders, where they could provide support to frontline responders by making signs, or they were caregivers, making sure that frontline responders and disruptors had what they needed to actually continue to show up night after night, which folks were doing in places like DC, where I live, and other places around the country. So that's the way in which you can think about the ecosystem, because that is really what this framework, it's about your roles and your values, but it's also about an ecosystem or a community, the beloved community, as Dr. King used to say, given yesterday was the anniversary of his birth. What is your beloved community? And you might have many, right? But how do you align your roles and your skills and your values with what that community is doing to be in service of a cause that you care about?
Yeah, that's so powerful. There's a question in here I'm going to pull up. It aligns with that. Is how do I know what I'm doing actually benefits other people? I think that's really what you're getting to, right?
Yeah. So how do I know if what I'm doing is really benefiting others? I mean, you could evaluate that in many ways, right? Sometimes we know immediately. So for example, for someone who's a disruptor who actually has a quote, brave or courageous conversation with a family member who is uttering racist remarks, you might know immediately if you're benefiting that person, as well as others, right, who could be in relationship with that person or hearing from that person. Sometimes, though, we don't know if we're benefiting others, because we have to really remember that justice and liberation are long-term struggles that sometimes we might not see in our generation, or we will see parts of, but we won't get the full picture necessarily, right? And so that's why it is so important to, again, get aligned with values, but also be part of a community, because our communities can mirror for us if our actions are actually helpful or not. I've had lots of people check in with me to be like, you know what you said at that event, or something that you might think is the way to go, is not the right way, right? So to get check-ins from people who will be real with you, also ways to evaluate whether or not you're benefiting others or not.
Yeah, that's powerful. Somebody asked a similar question, which I think, again, like, I love how this conversation is being so definitive. Can you talk about the role of cooperative activism versus performative? And I think that, again, your idea of being in relationship, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, performative allyship is something that, we've been hearing more and more about. And oftentimes what that means is where there's some sort of virtue signaling, right? You signal that you care about a particular community, or you are saying the right thing, or using the right hashtag, right? Or retweeting the right person. But what does that mean in your life, right? In our lives? How does that actually show up? I saw a tweet yesterday where someone said, you can tweet about Dr. King on this day, but are you actually living into his message the rest of the year? And so that's really a way of thinking about moving from this performative public signaling of what I believe in and what I care about, and then asking internally, how does that show up? So, if, for example, you're someone who considers yourself a weaver, so a weaver is someone who connects the dots, who can see the through lines between things that seem disconnected. So for a weaver, they might be making decisions on a daily basis, like, I know that there's a community in my area that is actually food insecure because of the pandemic. And I also know that there are people and organizations and funds that I can resource to assist folks, right? So I'm going to make the connection. So that's something that we can do in a daily basis, to make sure that we're showing up and living into the values.
Yeah, I love the weaver. Somebody said weaver joke in the comments, and I agree. Do you want to, as I pull up another question, do you want to just name them and go through them really quickly for people that might not remember
Yeah,
from
sure.
into
Yeah.
the conversation?
Sure. And if anyone is on here from Building Movement, feel free to drop the link into the comments where folks can find this. But it's on our website, buildingmovement.org. So the different roles are, as I mentioned, a weaver who sees the through lines, a guide. So guides are folks who are able to be mentors, who kind of walked this path before and can provide some discerning advice. Storytellers is a third role. And Nicole, I would say you're also a storyteller in many ways, right? I mean, someone who's actually documenting, archiving, and sharing stories of our people, right? Our grandmothers are storytellers. Healers. So healers are folks who are actually able to see the intergenerational consequences of harm, whether that is racism or any other form of oppression, but also have ideas on how to attend to that harm in a macro way. So I often think of people like the NAP ministry as an example of of a person and an organization and a concept where it's about thinking of rest as a form of healing. Caregivers are people who also tend to harm, but they often do it in a smaller micro way. So they're looking at, so how are Black employees at my workplace feeling, and how can I attend to what they might be going through, right? So thinking about what is happening in the immediate. Disruptors often get sort of a bad reputation at times, but I think of disruptors as people like Congressman Lewis would say, people who get into good trouble. So one of the disruptors that we might think about is, I think Naomi Osaka, the US Open champion, is a disruptor. You might remember if you watched the championship last year that she walked into every match wearing a Black face mask with the name of a Black person who had been killed by police or vigilante violence. And in so she was disrupting sort of the tennis sport, right? Also making sure that everyone saw her, and disrupting sort of how people think about what is happening out there beyond the tennis auditorium. Builders are people, a lot of us are builders, you know, people who have kind of a solution to the big vision. So, you know, visionaries is another role. So builders and visionaries often work well together. The visionary sees the North Star, and the builder can put like the spreadsheet and the run of show and the scaffolding and everything together to make it happen. And then frontline responders are people who are really the people who can immediately respond to a crisis in the community. They've got their, you know, phone has all of the contacts of everyone that needs to be organized, right? And they're able to respond very quickly. And then lastly, experimenters. So these are folks who are willing to take risks, who identify innovative ways to do something, respond to a moment, and they're also not afraid of making mistakes and course correcting. So those are 10 roles. You might see yourself. So if you heard any that you feel you are, I would love to know in the chat.
Yeah, put them in the comments, y'all.
Yeah.
That would be great. And I pinned the link to the ecosystem role map that you can see. So you can just type into your browser on your computer right now, check them all out for you. Or if you're watching afterwards, just like conversation. The comments or the questions in here are incredible. I'm going to pull up this one because I think it's a really fascinating one. Do you have any tips on how to introduce this framework into the workplace?
Yes, thank you so much for asking that question. And I'm curious to know what workplace you might be in, but what I found is that you can actually introduce it into different workplaces. So for example, in the corporate sector, there have been folks who used it to talk about diversity and equity. So that, again, we want to connect it to a social change value, right? And so in the corporate sector, if there is an interest in actually thinking about, well, how does my company show up right now? What is its diversity and equity and inclusion policy internally? How does it show up for Black communities outside of our company, right? So this framework can be used, and the way to introduce it could actually be to what I've seen people do is a lot of people of color employees actually take it to their diversity, inclusion, equity teams and ask for this to be a conversation or a workshop that occurs.
Mm.
And on the link that Nicole pinned, you can find a guide with a lot of questions. You can also reach out to us, and we do workshops as well. But you can introduce it that way. People have used it at staff meetings, retreats, you know, any sort of popular education even. So there are different ways you can introduce it. The question I would say is, you know, a lot of times we have the values in mind and we know, you know, where we want to go, but we just don't know how to get there. And we also don't know how to organize the folks around us to get there. So this might be an organizing tool. And that's what I would say. Like, here's an organizing tool to help us get to our goal, and then see if folks are ready to use it.
That's amazing. Adolescents Aware said, do you do virtual online workshops?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, right now they're all virtual. So yes, we do a lot of Zoom virtual workshops. We can do them for organizations or networks or coalitions. Absolutely.
Amazing. And we'll make sure when this is posted on our feed, we'll make sure there's all of these links available. Feel free to reach out to us if you miss anything. If it's, you know, if you tap on either of our accounts to be able to send a DM, and we'll take care of it. Next question, because actually there's 4 of these questions in here. What is your advice for any kids or teens that want to find their role? I think oftentimes people believe that you have to be in a position of power, or you have to be old enough to vote to be able to take action. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
That is a great question. I love it. I'm also a mom of a 10-year-old, and so I'm loving this question on many levels. One of my favorite things that happened about a month ago is that I heard from a mother of a 4th grader who used this framework in his classroom to actually identify racial justice and other people who fight for justice and liberation, you know, more famous people, and mapping them on this framework. So one way to do it is to actually use it to help us learn about people who have played these roles in the past, our ancestors and our elders, and people who are doing so now. So it might be an interesting way for students to learn about it. So beyond like learning in that way, of course, folks can also, young folks are using this particular tool to identify where they play a role. So it could be, for example, in a campus organization. It could be as a volunteer group, right? And there are so, I mean, I'm finding that, you know, this is a generational moment, right, for a lot of young folks. This 2020 was, with the pandemic, the political climate, and the uprisings. And so a lot of young people are catalyzed and mobilized in a particular manner right now. And so they're coming together. They are organizing online, right? They are learning more. They're trying to figure out how to get engaged in different movements for change locally and nationally. So yes, we have seen folks use it in, you know, working with like a youth climate summit, or young people who are part of a college organization. So there are lots of ways that young people can use it too.
That's amazing. And I really love what you said about like learning about the roles, finding how people have shown up in your life, like your ancestors, a community leader. I think that's something anybody could do, not just kids. I'm going to sit down and do that with some of the people I admire as well. So thank you for that. It's
yeah,
so way.
Yeah, and I don't, there's, again, if someone from BMP is on, I know that someone who we were in touch with last year used this to actually identify reading material for each of these particular roles based on people who showed up in that way, right? So she created like a syllabus in a way for understanding Black liberation and utilizing these roles to identify books and articles and readings. So there's lots of ways that it can be interpreted and used.
Wow, amazing. Somebody asked like how it could be used to the other bookend, like grandmas or people out of the workplace caring for grandchildren. Any advice for network, or maybe like identifying a role in that capacity?
Yeah, so that's one of the questions I get asked often, which is I don't have an ecosystem. I don't have a community. So what if I don't work at, you know, an organization? What if I'm not part of a college campus group or anything like that? So in that sense, what I would say is that it does take a little bit of an effort to find your people, right? But if you don't have one naturally, and usually the ones we think about are our workplaces, our friends, our family, our politically conscious folks in our lives, right? But it doesn't have to be that everyone has it. So it is important to also start to create that. And I've seen, for example, seniors showing up in so many ways. Like I think about, the elders who were actually knitting masks and sewing masks, right? And creating a network of that. They self-organized to do that in many parts of the country. And so it is possible to do it. Even in, I'm Indian American, and, a lot of the elders in my community organize on WhatsApp. And so they form a network, right? And so a network or an ecosystem is just a like-minded people who align with similar goals and values. You can have multiple ecosystems, and you can even play different roles in your ecosystems too. Like in my family role, I often play the role of a caregiver, but that might not be how I show up, say, with a campaign that I'm focused on, right? So yes. Don't forget the seniors. I like that. Yes.
Don't forget the seniors. Absolutely. One more question for you, because I'm really inspired by this. Gosh, there's so many questions on how to engage kids in here. So I hear you. It's helpful. Who is your great inspiration?
Wow, that's a tall question to ask, right? I mean, I have many great inspirations. I am inspired by my aunt, who basically raised 4 kids of her own in India, and also found a way to teach and to write stories. So like my own family, the women in my family are people that I'm inspired by. I'm also really inspired by the community of activists that I've been able to surround myself with in the post 9/11 environment. So a lot of South Asian, Muslim, Arab, Black community members and activists who have been doing really amazing transformative work that I've learned from. So people in my own life, but also people that, I've been in movement with. It looks like, thank you. I think Catherine is put the link to Aaliyah's really amazing BLM social change syllabus. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you for pulling that up. And I'll make sure it's also saved in the comments below when you're watching this as a video. So one last thing. What are you inspired? We got who you're inspired by, but what is inspiring you about the future? If there's something.
Yeah, I mean, I get inspired by both like really big social change moments, but also by smaller ways in which we're relating to each other and building relationship. And so, I'm inspired by a lot of the folks that have reached out to me who've been using this framework and actually taking action in their communities. I mean, obviously, we're doing this the day before the inauguration. And I think that I'm inspired by a lot of the social change movements over the past 4 years that have really pushed us, right? Pushed us to resist, pushed us to remember what our core values are, and pushed us to work together because we've had to. And so I'm thinking about what happens after tomorrow. Do we go from a place of resistance to a place of reckoning and accountability? How do we use solidarity as a way to bridge polarization? So those are the questions and the people who are thinking about those that, I'm thinking about and being inspired by.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. And I want to hear also, Nicole, about your work. And I know that you also write and you do work like can you share a little bit? Because I know there are folks asking about kids and teens. So you are writing a book for children, right?
Yeah. So I run the Anti-Racist Daily. I came into it because I love writing and started this newsletter 7 months ago now, just offering ways that people can help to practice every day to change racism and dismantling white supremacy. I come from a practice of yoga and mindfulness, and I do a lot of healing work. I know that we have to practice that consistently over time, right? That's
Yeah.
a key philosophy is being consistent and being committed to. And I wanted to see the same kind of practice happening where it matters, which is like closing the equity we have. And so that's how I started the anti-racism community. But my work before that started with kids, like you said. So I started teaching mindfulness in schools over a decade ago. I run a nonprofit that brings yoga and mindfulness to schools, and I released a book that has those practices for kids, and it really centers diverse kids that, you know, unfortunately aren't usually seen in the wellness space. It's called Mindful Moves. You want to go check it out.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so I'm just really excited about where we can go from here and conversations and the practices that we're cultivating. I feel very strongly that we owe it to the next generation. We owe it to our kids. Right? And there's so many incredible activists and leaders that are bigger than me that, gosh, have been doing this work for longer than I have, right? So I'm just really inspired.
No, that's great. And I love hearing the title of that book, Mindful Moves. And it's going to be so important for young folks, right, to learn about sustainability and to know that they can talk about the trauma, the need for healing, because I think a lot of us don't even feel like we have the vocabulary to do that, much less feel like we can give ourselves permission to talk about it. And
Yeah.
so I think it's so important that you're doing this work, both in terms of the daily, but also in terms of the writing and the weaving that you seem to be doing.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm so grateful that you're doing this work, and that you shared this work. It really struck me when I found it, when I was working on that article. And so thank you so much. Can you just share a little bit more about where we can find you, where we can find the Building Movement Project, and all of that stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're interested in trainings or sessions on either the social change ecosystem framework or on solidarity practice, those are kind of the two pillars that I primarily work on, then you can reach out to www.buildingmovement.org is where you can find information on the solidarity work and the social change ecosystem map. You can also find me on Instagram, Deepa Iyer. Obviously, you're on the BMP Instagram, so you know us, hopefully. But yeah, so reach out. Email is the best way. I'm still like kind of a newbie when it comes to Instagram. Email is, yeah, well, yeah, you know, you gotta go with it, right? But please be in touch for workshops or sessions or any sort of speaking engagements, because again, the goal for us is to get more people involved in taking social change on as a daily exercise and to figure out how to build the tools so that they can make change in their communities.
Yeah. And if you are listening live, you're going to be able to see all of those and calls to action in our stories. If you're watching pre-recorded, it's in the comments below. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate your time. I'm just truly grateful for your work.
Thanks, Nicole. I feel the same way about you. So I hope we can meet in person one of these days.
We will when it's safe and healthy. Absolutely. All right. Take care. And thank you all for listening. We'll see you soon.
Everyone. Bye.